This is Leah Guerrero with Colorado Christian University for my Bible 101 class, Old Testament Introduction. This is Session 2, Storyboard 2, the 4 phases, my presentation. There are 5 parts to this project. Part 1 is who my audience is. Then there are the 4 phases, which is Part 2, the creation, Part 3, the fall, Part 4, redemption, and Part 5, new creation. Part 1, who is my audience? The audience I chose is my immediate family. This would consist of my husband Cody, my son Dayton, who is 12 years old, and my son Dustin, who is 10 years old. My husband Cody has pretty extensive knowledge of the Bible. He studies the Word of God on a regular basis and is able to understand who the scriptures are written to and what context that they were in and how they were meant to be applied. Cody has also taught biblical knowledge to men in the jail and halfway house in Fort Collins through a program our pastor had started out there called Authentic Manhood, to teach men who have been in the system most of their lives how to be authentic man of God and not what society's version of what a real man looks like. Both of my children, Dayton and Dustin, have basic knowledge of the Bible. They mostly know through prayer and stories and talk at home. Also, they go to church with us on Sunday mornings, and they have learned a lot in their children Bible study. And then my oldest son has also been attending church with us now more recently in the adult program, so he's learning a lot there too. And we encourage them to ask questions, so they learn a lot. Part 2 of my presentation is the first of the 4 phases, which is the creation. The creation of the Bible is from Genesis 1:1 through Genesis 2. In Genesis 1:1 through in Genesis 1:1 through 25, God creates every single natural part of this world by speaking it into existence. After he creates every part of this world, he sees what it is that he created and he says that it is good. He is pleased. When God created the first humans in Genesis 1:26 through 27, he says that he creates them in our image, meaning that we are created in the image of God. In Genesis 2, God sees that Adam, the first man, is lonely, so he puts Adam to sleep and takes a rib from him, and out of his rib he creates woman. And then in Genesis 2:24, is where we hear of man and woman being joined together as flesh. When a man leaves his parents to be joined together with a woman, they become one. And that is the vow that's made when 2 people get married before God. God's hands creating the world. Part 3 of the 4 phases. The second phase is the fall. The fall of mankind is found in the Bible in Genesis verses 3 through 11. In Genesis 3, the serpent tricks Eve. God told Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge, that they could eat from any other tree in the Garden of Eden, but that they are not to eat the fruit from this tree. And the serpent tricks Eve by saying, "Did God really say?" And so he's able to manipulate her. And at that point, when she says, "Well, God said that I wasn't supposed to because we will die," and the serpent says, "You will not die. You will actually have the same knowledge that God does." And so she eats from the fruit of the tree and then shares it with her husband, Adam. And immediately they realize that they are naked. Their eyes are open. They see good and evil. They become embarrassed and they hide from God when God comes into the garden to call them. And God becomes upset because he's like, "Why have you hidden from me?" And they're like, "Well, we're naked." And he's like, "How do you know that you're naked?" And of course, God already knew the answer. And so at that point, God punishes Adam and Eve. He puts his plan into motion in Genesis 3, verses 14 through 19, where he tells the serpent that The serpent will be punished in that he will put enmity between the woman and the serpent, and that he will crush his heel and his seed will crush his head, the serpent's head. Genesis goes on to describe the lineage of Jesus from Adam and Eve through the Old Testament. And then there is also the story of how God started over with Noah's Ark. People had become sinful and God had a plan to restart the world over. And so he rescued Noah and his family to start fresh. And then there's also the Tower of Babel in the end of Genesis, where God separates the people who are building the Tower of Babel, separates their languages, and so that they can become confused and aren't able to work together for destruction. And this is the serpent and Eve handing over the apple to Adam. Part 4 is the third phase, which is redemption. The redemption of mankind to the Creator is found throughout the entire rest of the Bible. This ranges from Genesis 12 all the way up to Revelation, the last book of the Bible. The story of Abraham starts off with God making promises to Abraham. This is where he promises Abraham that he's going to become, he's going to be blessed. There are four distinct promises. This starts in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 4, where it reads, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Shortly after, God's covenant with Abraham is made, and that happens in Genesis 15. And this is where he says in Genesis 15:5, "And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars. If you were able to number them, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he would believe the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness." The story of God's redemption in Exodus 1 through 18 tells a whole nother story. In Exodus, we hear the story of Moses in the burning bush, and this is when Moses is walking and he comes across the burning bush. And in this burning bush, God declares himself by the name Yahweh, and that is the way that God is known throughout the rest of the Bible as well, as Yahweh. And he tells Moses that he's going to use him to deliver his people and redeem them. And it is, he is 80 years old when this happens. And shortly after that, Moses goes back to the Pharaoh in Egypt, where all of his people, the Israelites, are prisoners. And he tells the Pharaoh that God had sent him and that he demands for him and his people to be freed. And during the course of this, there are 10 different plagues that God uses upon the Pharaoh during his time throughout Egypt. And from the very first plague all the way to the very last plague, the Pharaoh's heart becomes hardened. And with the last plague, he takes all the firstborn children, including the Pharaoh's, God does. And that is when he finally decides to release his people. When they take off at the final part of his people being released, they are being chased down by the Pharaoh. After the Pharaoh lets them leave, he changes his mind and doesn't want to let them go because they're profitable to him. So they chase after him, and that is when God parts the Red Sea. And all of God's people make it through to the other side on dry land, and then he closes the sea on the Pharaoh's people, and all of them die. That is the story of how God's people are redeemed. And there are many other prophecies. There are a lot of prophecies throughout the Old Testament, all the way through Genesis to the end of the Old Testament that prophesy the coming of Jesus and that are fulfilled in the New Testament, but that is a whole nother topic. And then we have part 5 of the presentation, which is phase 4, which is new creation. New creation is found in the last chapter of the Bible, which is Revelation. And in Revelation 21 and 22, we see a picture of what a new heaven and new earth looks like. And this is through John. John is having a vision and he sees a new heaven and new earth. And then he also sees a new Jerusalem come down from heaven. He also sees that God will be with his people and he will comfort them. And he goes on to describe what the city of God is going to look like and how it's established here on earth. And then John also sees the names that are written in the book of life. And this will be the people who will enter the city and live with God. And to conclude this vision that John has, he has a plea for the Lord to return to earth. In Revelation 22:12, the Lord does say that he is coming soon, that he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. And this is my reference list slide, which concludes my presentation. Thank you.